They thought his house was just another line in a spreadsheet, declared abandoned, sold with forged papers, erased by a woman drunk on power. What they didn't know was this: he was already watching. And 14 minutes after the deal closed, the raid began, and her entire world collapsed.
If you'd told me a year ago that I'd be standing up to a homeowners association with more legal teeth than a corporate litigation firm, I would have laughed and gone back to staining the deck. But here I am, deep in the weeds of suburban bureaucracy, wondering if the peaceful life I bought into came with an invisible asterisk. My name's Eric Carter, retired cybersecurity consultant, part-time woodworker, full-time private property enthusiast. After 20 years of corporate life, I finally cashed out and bought my dream home, an old craftsman on 3 acres of wooded land just outside a sleepy North Carolina suburb. It wasn't fancy, but it had what I wanted: space, quiet, and, most importantly, no hoe. That last bit was non-negotiable. I'd dealt with enough control freaks in my life. The first few months were bliss. I installed a workshop out back, tended to a chaotic but charming vegetable garden, and hosted weekly grill-outs with a handful of neighbors. That's how I got close to Joe, a Vietnam vet with a spine of steel and a laugh like gravel, and Lena, a local teacher who ran the high school debate club and could verbally disarm a man twice her size with just her eyebrows. Then there was Matt, mid-30s tech guy, bit of a loner, sharp as a razor. We called ourselves the Outer Circle, jokingly referring to the fact our homes sat just outside the HOA jurisdiction that blanketed the rest of the development. The trouble started with a letter. I found it one morning tucked inside my mailbox, though it wasn't delivered by USPS. The envelope was stamped with an official-looking emblem and bore the words Maple Hills Community Governance Council. Inside was a typed notice. Dear Mr. Carter, it has come to our attention that your property presents several issues that violate community standards, including but not limited to improper fencing, non-neutral exterior colors, unauthorized outdoor structures, and unapproved signage. Please arrange compliance within 14 days to avoid formal action. I actually laughed out loud, a real belly laugh. Then I read it again. What community standards? My land wasn't under their authority. I had the deeds and legal records to prove it. This had to be some mistake. That same afternoon, I heard the crunch of heels on gravel. A woman approached up my drive like she owned it. Short platinum bob, pressed khakis, clipboard hugged to her chest like it contained nuclear launch codes. She didn't bother with pleasantries. You must be Mr. Carter, she said, lips tight. That's me, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I'm Karen Blake, president of the Maple Hills Homeowners Association. I wanted to follow up personally on the notice we sent. The one you slipped in my mailbox? I raised an eyebrow. Bit odd, seeing as I'm not part of your HOA. She offered a smile that didn't touch her eyes. Actually, that's what I came to clarify. While your parcel may have been originally recorded as outside the initial filing, our recent community expansion reclassified this area into the secondary governance zone. I blinked. What the hell is a secondary governance zone? It's a designation used when adjacent properties are impacted by the visual integrity and shared value systems of a managed community, she replied, like she was reading from a pamphlet. I held up a hand. Let me stop you right there. My property was built in 1968. Your HOA didn't exist until the late 90s. I've got records, signed filings, even the original zoning documents. You've got no jurisdiction here. Karen didn't flinch. Then perhaps we can consider this a good neighbor conversation. I crossed my arms. Is that what this is? She sighed like a school principal dealing with a defiant student. Look, Eric, nobody wants conflict, but a mismatched fence and those signs, she gestured vaguely toward the private property. Trespassers will be composted. Sign, don't reflect well on the community. The community, I repeated. You mean your HOA? Same thing, she said brightly. No, Karen, I said. Not the same thing at all. She muttered something about consulting the board and turned on her heel. I watched her disappear down the gravel like a disappointed mall cop. Over the next week, things escalated. More letters. Anonymous complaints. One claimed my truck was aggressively parked. Another said the blue chairs on my porch were psychologically disruptive. It got weirder. A guy in a windbreaker with a clipboard, different guy, same clipboard posture, started showing up on the edge of my property taking pictures. He never crossed the line, but he hovered. I waved once. He didn't wave back. At Joe's suggestion, we held a barbecue to calm the waters. Karen didn't show, but 2 other HOA board members did. They stood by the food table, eyeing the pork ribs like they were contraband, and whispered to each other like we were smuggling wild boars. Matt, ever the digital sleuth, began digging. There's no way this is legit, he said, swiping through HOA boundary maps on his tablet. According to these filings, your lot was never annexed. If they're trying to enforce regulations, they're bluffing, or worse. By the end of that week, bluffing wasn't the vibe anymore. One night I came home to find a small sign staked on the edge of my lawn. This property is under compliance review. I ripped it out and threw it on the compost pile. That's when I realized this wasn't about aesthetics or fences. Karen wasn't going to stop because she was wrong. She was going to keep pushing until I either caved in or she found a way to force me out. And I don't cave. It didn't take long for things to go from petty to pathological. After the sign incident, I thought maybe Karen would back off. That maybe, just maybe, her board of Stepford minions would realize they'd barked up the wrong tree. Instead, they doubled down. The next morning, I found a printed final warning taped to my mailbox. It cited imaginary fines, non-compliance violations, and included a QR code that linked to a generic page full of HOA bylaws. At the top, in bold, it read, "You have 14 days to correct infractions before escalation." It would have been funny if it wasn't so persistent. I consulted my documents again, laid everything out with Matt's help. Deed history, zoning certificates, even a statement from the county office confirming I was not, and had never been, under HOA jurisdiction. I emailed a full packet to the board, CCing Karen. Then I printed a copy, walked to their little HOA drop box at the clubhouse, and stuffed it inside with a note that said, "You have 14 days to learn to read." That's when the passive-aggressive dance turned into full-on surveillance. It started subtle. A white SUV parked at the far end of my gravel road. Same one, every day. Sometimes the windows were cracked. Sometimes someone was inside, just sitting there. The kind of person who didn't pretend to be checking their phone. They just watched. Then came the drone. I shit you not. An actual buzzing, blinking quadcopter started hovering near my workshop around sunset. I shot it down with a slingshot and a washer tied to a rubber band. Left the shattered carcass on my porch rail for dramatic effect. Matt was giddy. I intercepted the Wi-Fi frequency. Guess what? It was registered to someone named J. Hale, Vice President of the HOA. Fantastic, I muttered. They're not even hiding the stalking. Joe wasn't laughing. These people are escalating. This is intimidation. I've seen this before. Next comes legal harassment. He was right. Within the week, the HOA filed a community impact concern with the city, accusing me of devaluing surrounding homes, attracting undesirable traffic with suspicious behavior, and, my personal favorite, harboring unlicensed livestock. Apparently, my chickens were considered emotional hazards to the community. I had to go down to City Hall in person, where the clerk, bless her, took one look at my paperwork and rolled her eyes. "This is a prank," she said flatly. "More like a strategic nuisance," I replied. She added a formal note to the record, confirming no infractions, and promised to flag future filings from that HOA for manual review. But back in the neighborhood, things weren't cooling off. At the local farmers' market, I caught wind that Karen had been whispering sweet, fabricated poison to people. According to her, I was a sovereign citizen, that weird conspiracy group that refuses to recognize government authority. She told one neighbor I was running a crypto mining operation from my basement. Another said she heard I kept survivalist weapons in an underground vault. To be clear, I had no vault, just a very normal root cellar and a well-oiled shotgun inherited from my granddad. But I noticed the way people started glancing at me sideways. Parents kept their kids closer. The mailman no longer chatted. There was this new chill, and it wasn't from the weather. Then one morning, I stepped out to grab my coffee mug off the porch and found a citation posted directly on my front door. This one didn't come from the HOA. It came from a private third-party compliance company, Community Integrity Services, Inc. The form was printed, notarized, poorly, and cited me for unauthorized facade materials and failure to maintain uniform community aesthetic. The kicker? The fine listed was $975. I stormed down to the HOA office that afternoon. The door was locked, blinds drawn. Their website said they were under renovation. Of course. I wasn't alone in my frustration. Lena pulled me aside a few days later, clearly agitated. "Karen's got a whisper campaign going against me too," she said. "Apparently, I've been indoctrinating students with anti-suburban values. Whatever the hell that means." "She's turning neighbors into weapons," I said. "No," Lena said darkly. "She's turning compliance into currency. And she wants us bankrupt, isolated, or gone." Joe came by that evening with copies of old HOA newsletters he dug up from a friend who lived deeper in the neighborhood. They included photos of properties Karen had reclaimed through ambiguous legal processes, homes that were mysteriously vacated due to fines or code violations, then quietly sold. 3 in the last 2 years, Joe said, all elderly owners. All claimed they were bullied into leaving. Matt nodded grimly. "We're not dealing with a neighborhood committee. This is a goddamn acquisition strategy." So we formed a pact. Matt set up a secure cloud to store every interaction. Lena began taking notes on all student-parent conversations that referenced HOA involvement. Joe? He started wearing a body cam. As for me, I printed a large sign and nailed it to my front gate. Private property. Not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Trespassers will be prosecuted. We are recording everything. The next morning, the sign was gone. In its place was a little red sticker on my mailbox. It simply read, "Non-compliant." By the time the 4th drone showed up, this one with a tiny camera ball swiveling like some dystopian insect, I stopped reacting with anger. I just waved to it, walked back into my workshop, and added another time-stamped entry to the evidence log we'd started compiling. The little bastards weren't even subtle anymore. Matt had rigged a local server that stored motion-activated video from every angle of my property. Joe had set up trail cams along the backwoods. Lena? She'd started recording every HOA-related conversation she had at school or in the grocery store. What started as frustration had transformed into a kind of precision resistance. We weren't just documenting the crazy anymore. We were building a case. It felt like the calm before a legal storm. And that storm finally came knocking. On a Monday morning at exactly 9 a.m., 2 black and white cruisers pulled into my driveway. Not speeding, not blaring sirens, just arriving. Calm and deliberate. I stepped outside, hands visible, coffee in one, phone in the other. One officer approached. Middle-aged, square jaw, the kind of guy who probably coached Little League and meant well. "Mr. Carter?" "Yep, that's me." "We got a call from the Maple Hills Homeowners Association. Said you were engaged in unauthorized development. They also claimed you were violating zoning ordinances and may be in possession of illegal surveillance equipment." I blinked. "You mean the motion sensors on my land? Recording people trespassing?" He shrugged. "That's what they said. Do you have documentation for your property lines?" "Better," I said. "I've got a copy of the original deed, tax records, zoning maps, and a letter from the county clerk stating I'm not part of any HOA. I invited them in. Matt, who happened to be over, pulled up the camera footage on the living room TV. Joe came in from the backyard and offered everyone bottled water, like we were hosting a PTA meeting. The officers watched quietly as Matt scrubbed through clips, Karen pacing on the edge of my lot, clipboard in hand, her car idling for hours by the front ditch. A man, probably Hale, placing that non-compliant sticker under cover of darkness. "This is harassment," I said, "and we're tired of playing defense." One of the officers nodded. "Off the record?" "It sure looks like it." They left after about 20 minutes. No citations, no searches. But it didn't feel like a win. More like a technical pause. That evening, I called in a favor from an old friend. Well, more like an old pain in the ass who happened to owe me. Michael Reyes, former colleague from my cybersecurity days, now a practicing attorney with a specialty in property law and civil harassment. He drove up that weekend, took one look at the printed documentation spread across my dining table and muttered, "Jesus Christ, this isn't an HOA. This is a hostile acquisition cartel with matching windbreakers." We spent 6 hours compiling a legal timeline. Every false citation, every unauthorized attempt at enforcement, every surveillance act, every verbal threat Karen or her board issued. Reyes's eyes lit up like he'd found a legal goldmine. "We're not just defending your rights," he said. "We're setting them up for civil liability, and possibly criminal exposure." But that same weekend, while we were high on our newfound strategy, Karen pulled a power move. She called an emergency HOA neighborhood forum at the community center. The invitation was sent via group text and email to every household within a half-mile radius, except mine. Lena went anyway. She sat quietly in the back row, pretending to grade papers, while her phone recorded everything from her purse. Karen stood at the front like a preacher at a fire and brimstone sermon. She clicked through a presentation titled, "Protecting Maple Hills from Decline." My name came up on slide 4. "Some residents," she said, with that plastic sweetness in her voice, "have refused to comply with community expectations. They've rejected unity. Their choices impact property values. They endanger our cohesion." According to Lena's recording, she even used the phrase, "necessary resolution pathways." Lena sent the audio to Reyes and me the moment she got home. We listened in silence. "Jesus," Reyes said. "She's not just overreaching. She's organizing a witch hunt." I stared at the screen, the waveform bouncing in rhythm with Karen's voice. This isn't about paint color or weeds. She wants me gone. Joe tapped the table. So, what's our play? We finish the evidence package, I said. Then we send it to someone who can really do something. And that's when I made a decision I hadn't planned on. I called someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Let's call him Agent Brooks. He works in a, well, let's say specialized wing of state law enforcement. Economic crimes, fraud, abuse of legal structures. We used to trade information back when I tracked online security breaches for federal contractors. I didn't tell him everything, just enough to get a raised eyebrow and a promise to review the folder I'd email. Send me everything, he said. I've seen small-town scams before, but if this is half as bad as it sounds, she might have stepped on the wrong toes. We sent the documents the next day, and then we waited. Karen didn't know it yet, but her next move might be her last. I always thought that if someone stole my house, I'd notice. You know, like a missing wall or a U-Haul backed up to the porch. But the theft didn't come with flashing lights. It came with a manila envelope taped to my front door. The envelope was unmarked. No stamp, no sender. Inside was a single document titled Notice of Abandonment Transfer. At first, I thought it was a prank. Then I saw my name typed under Previous Owner and a second name, Maple Hills Community Holdings, LLC, under New Owner. The effective date? 3 days ago. For a moment, I just stood there, blinking like a Windows error message. The document claimed I had willfully relinquished rights to the property due to vacancy, non-responsiveness, and prolonged non-compliance with community standards. There was a forged signature at the bottom. Mine. Or something close enough to pass a casual glance. I walked inside, sat down on the stairs, and stared at my walls, my workshop, my chickens, still pecking peacefully outside like nothing had happened. According to this paper, none of it was mine anymore. I called Reyes. I didn't even say hello. They did it, I said. They actually fucking did it. Within an hour, we were at the county clerk's office pulling up property transfer records. And there it was, buried under Emergency Expedited Municipal Housing Reclamation, stamped and filed like it was just another Tuesday. A fast-tracked transfer of ownership for abandoned property. They'd filed it through a small housing program meant for foreclosures and truly derelict structures. Somehow, Karen had slipped my house through the process like a tax write-off no one would notice. The attached justification was a 3-page packet of photos taken from odd angles to make the house look empty, combined with falsified community complaints and a so-called affidavit from an HOA officer. The officer's name? John Hale. Of course, it was a full-blown heist cloaked in bureaucracy. Reyes stayed eerily calm. This might be the best thing that's ever happened to us. You want to run that by me again? They think they've won. That means they'll let their guard down. He made a call to Agent Brooks. Within 30 minutes, we had confirmation. The paperwork triggered a flag in the state's fraud detection system. The expedited process Karen used had previously been abused in another county, and they'd set up a sting operation ready to catch the next fraud attempt. Apparently, we were the lucky winners. Brooks's voice over the phone was sharp. Keep playing along. Don't confront her. Don't change your routine. Give us 48 hours. But Karen wasn't finished. That same evening, Lena called me, her voice tight. She invited me to coffee. I paused. Karen? She said she wants to talk, one-on-one, about the community. I don't like that. Neither do I, Lena said. That's why I'm taking my purse recorder. They met at a local cafe the next day. Karen showed up in full Stepford mode. White sweater, gold necklace, pastel smile. She opened with pleasantries, then slid into veiled threats like it was her native language. Lena recorded everything. Karen suggested Lena should stop feeding Eric's delusions, that it would be better for everyone if she backed off. Then came the bribe. "I heard your school's trying to get that new library grant," Karen said. "Our community board has a few connections. It would be a shame if they thought your involvement in this situation made you a controversial figure." Lena didn't flinch. Karen leaned in. "Or worse, someone might raise concerns that you're encouraging students to side with a man under investigation. Do you really want that tied to your record?" The moment Lena walked out, she sent the recording to Reyes and Brooks. That was it. That was the final piece. Brooks called me that night. "We're greenlit. The warrant will be executed within 24 hours, but we need her to finish the transaction." "Wait, what transaction?" "She listed your property for resale this morning." I nearly dropped the phone. "She thinks she got away with it," Brooks continued. "Our team will be on site during the meeting. 14 minutes after the sale closes, we move." 14? Gotta let the wire clear. We want it admissible. So I waited. The next morning, Karen arrived at the HOA clubhouse looking positively radiant. A shiny black SUV pulled up shortly after, carrying a sharply dressed man who turned out to be the buyer. Only he wasn't a buyer. He was a plainclothes federal agent. They exchanged handshakes, paperwork, a briefcase. Inside that briefcase was pre-marked cash from the Department of Justice. From my perch across the street, sipping lukewarm gas station coffee, I watched as Karen signed the final document. My house. Sold again. Now with real money behind the fraud. 14 minutes later, a convoy of unmarked sedans and one city cruiser rolled up. They hit the clubhouse fast. No sirens, no warning. Just doors flying open, people shouting, agents moving like they'd done this 100 times. Karen was led out in cuffs. John Hale tried to run. Joe tackled him on the sidewalk. The HOA's office manager screamed something about constitutional rights. Matt filmed the whole thing from behind a hedge, laughing like a man reborn. By the time they loaded Karen into the car, she was sobbing. The smugness had peeled off her face like old wallpaper. And me? I just stood there, still technically not the owner of my own house. But the tide had turned. I always pictured courtrooms as sterile, impersonal places. Beige walls, slow ceiling fans, maybe a bored judge with half glasses. But the one where Karen Blake faced the weight of justice? That place buzzed. Not just with tension, but with something sharper, like the air itself knew the lies were finally outnumbered. The trial began barely 6 weeks after the raid. That was fast, especially for a case as layered as this, but apparently, once the fraud unit had Karen's entire scheme mapped out, it became what one prosecutor called a slam dunk wrapped in a Ryko bow. The morning of the first hearing, I stood outside the courthouse under a thin North Carolina sun, sipping coffee with Joe, Lena, and Matt. We weren't celebrating, not yet, but we were there, not to get revenge, just to make sure the truth didn't get bent again. Inside, Karen sat at the defendant's table like a suburban Marie Antoinette, face drawn, makeup thinner than usual, eyes darting. Her lawyer looked more exhausted than confident. Beside her sat John Hale, the HOA's vice president, and Kimberly Dodge, their legal consultant, who had, it turns out, knowingly filed 6 fraudulent documents and notarized 3 forged signatures, including mine. The courtroom was packed. Local journalists took notes like they were writing a true crime bestseller. One reporter from Raleigh even leaned over and whispered, "You're the HOA guy, right?" I nodded. "This is better than cable," she said. The assistant district attorney opened with what I can only describe as a controlled flamethrower of facts: emails, recorded calls, financial statements, a PowerPoint presentation with the title Community Control: How One HOA Orchestrated Property Theft. And then came the recording Lena made. The courtroom fell quiet as Karen's voice filled the speakers. Do you really want your school's funding tied to a man under investigation? Walk away, Lena, or you walk alone. That recording hit like a wrecking ball. The jury, most of them local, shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This wasn't some distant fraud ring. This was someone they saw at church picnics, someone who signed off on their fence colors. Lena testified next. She stood tall, clear, precise. She didn't embellish, just told the truth. By the time she stepped down, even the defense attorney looked like he wanted to call it quits. Matt presented the digital side. Timestamps of drones, metadata from files Karen thought she deleted, even VPN records showing how the HOA used spoofed emails to file fake complaints to city services. Joe followed with the physical evidence. Those signs, the trail cam photos, Karen herself placing a fake citation on my door. And then it was my turn. I told the court how I bought the house knowing it was free of HOA jurisdiction, how I received unprovoked notices, illegal fines, and even a final warning about non-existent violations, how my property was invaded, how police showed up based on fake complaints, how one morning I woke up legally homeless in my own living room. I showed them the fake signature. Then I looked Karen in the eyes. You didn't want compliance, I said. You wanted control. You weren't protecting the community. You were preying on it. By the third day, the prosecution had stacked so much evidence that the defense gave up trying to argue innocence. Instead, they pivoted to damage control. She believed she was acting in the best interest of the neighborhood, the lawyer claimed. The ADA didn't even blink. Funny, she said. She profited over $1.4 million in flipped abandoned properties. Best interest of who, exactly? The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Verdict: guilty on all counts, including wire fraud, falsifying government records, conspiracy to commit real estate theft, and criminal racketeering. Karen Blake received 17 years in federal prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 10. John Hale got her 11 years, and Kimberly Dodge earned and fee 6. The judge added a personal statement. This is not merely a case of overreach. This was a coordinated abuse of power disguised as community service. May this serve as a warning to every organization that thinks it can operate above the law. And then came the civil penalties. The HOA was formally dissolved by court order. Its assets, bank accounts, properties, even office furniture, were liquidated. I was awarded $1.2 million in restitution, plus $300,000 in damages, plus full reinstatement of property rights. But even sweeter than the judgment was the look on Karen's face when the judge denied her bail during appeal. I watched her being led out of the courtroom, shackled at the wrists and ankles. Not like a martyr, not like a villain, just defeated. The kind of person who built a paper kingdom and watched it burn the moment someone actually read the fine print. Outside the courthouse, news vans lined the street. Microphones, cameras, reporters shouting questions I had no interest in answering. All I cared about was one thing: my home. Mine again. Mine for real. We didn't go out that night. We didn't toast. We sat in my living room, the 5 of us, me, Joe, Lena, Matt, and Reyes, and listened to the silence. The kind that only comes after a storm finally ends, And even then, I knew this wasn't just about me anymore. There's a strange emptiness that comes after victory. Not the bad kind, just silence. A space where all the tension used to live. For days after the sentencing, I woke up half expecting another drone outside my window, another passive-aggressive notice taped to my door. But nothing came. Just morning light through the trees, and the same creak in the floorboards I'd grown to love. I wasn't naive enough to think the war was over. For others, it was still very much alive. But, battle? It was done. We'd won. And I had the signed court papers to prove it. The first week back home felt like moving in all over again. Even though I technically never left, the house felt lighter. Joe helped me take down the cameras. Lena brought over fresh basil from her garden, like we'd hit a seasonal reset. Matt? He installed a new router with government-grade encryption and said, "Just in case the HOA rises from the grave." It didn't. But what happened next surprised me. People started calling. Neighbors I barely knew. Folks from other counties. Strangers who saw the trial on the local news or caught the documentary that aired a week later on Channel 5. They all said the same thing. That happened to us, too. Turns out, Karen's scheme wasn't isolated. She was just the boldest. Other HOAs, different states, different names, had quietly tried similar things, acquiring properties through shady transfers, inventing fines, creating shell LLCs to buy and resell abandoned homes. That's when Lena said it first. We need to make this bigger. So we did. Matt built a clean, simple site in 3 days flat. KnowYourHOA.org. It had a map with flagged cases, a reporting form, and a legal resource hub. Reyes added templates for cease and desist letters, guides on reading HOA contracts, and a list of red flags to watch for. Within 2 weeks, the site had over 50,000 visitors. Emails poured in. Whistleblowers. Victims. A retired judge from Arizona who'd been sued for non-neutral landscaping and nearly lost his house. Local press took notice. Then state media. Then CBSO called. They sent a full crew to interview me, Lena, and Joe on the porch. Matt refused to be filmed. I looked like a man who lives in a basement full of Ethernet cables. But his name made it into the credits. The headline that aired, "The HOA that went too far, and the man who stopped it." I didn't love that title, but I understood it. People needed a face for the fight. What I didn't expect was the call from the State Attorney General's office. They wanted to meet, not in some sterile, bureaucratic building, but at a community roundtable to discuss HOA reform legislation. "Let me get this straight," I said to the assistant AG. "You want me to help rewrite the rules?" "We want to make sure this never happens again," she replied. "And frankly, you understand the problem better than half the lawyers on our team." So I sat at a long oak table, across from senators, real estate lawyers, and housing advocates, and told them exactly what had happened. Every lie, every document, every inch of ground Karen tried to take, and how close she came to getting away with it. The legislation that came out of that roundtable? It had Teeth mandatory public audits for HOA financial records, legal caps on administrative fines, criminal liability for fraudulent property transfer practices, a hotline for HOA abuse victims run by the State Housing Commission. Meanwhile, I got a check, $1.5 million totals. Between the federal settlement, court-awarded damages, and a surprise payout from my title insurance provider. who apparently wanted to make amends for not catching the forged transfer. I didn't blow the money. I gave 200 grand to a new legal fund Lena helped create. The Blake Watch. Yeah, we named it after her, partly as a joke. It pays for legal representation for HOA abuse victims in low-income neighborhoods. Matt upgraded our website into a full non-profit platform. Joe became our unofficial spokesman. Anytime a news crew showed up, he'd lean on the railing, arms crossed, and say, "We're just folks protecting what's ours." As for me, I didn't run for office. I didn't write a book. I just got my house back. And somehow, that was enough. But I started getting invited to city councils, property owner forums, even college panels. People asked me to speak, not because I was some expert, but because I'd lived it. At first, I said no. Then, one day, I said yes. And it felt right. The most surreal moment came when I walked into a public hearing and saw Karen's story being cited in a bill proposal as a case study in systemic HOA abuse. Her name, once synonymous with power, now used as a warning. The woman who tried to erase me from my own home had become the symbol of everything wrong with unchecked suburban control. Strange world. I've always hated block parties. Plastic chairs, lukewarm hot dogs, forced smiles, and someone inevitably trying to sell you essential oils or a referral to their cousin's real estate firm. But this one was different. We called it the Karen Party. No one batted an eye at the name. If anything, people leaned into it. The invite said, "Come celebrate the fall of tyranny, the return of private property, and the exile of the clipboard queen. BYOB. And yes, chickens welcome." By 5 p.m., my yard was full, not with HOA drones or nosy board members, but with real neighbors, the kind who bring too much potato salad and ask how your dog is doing. People brought chairs, guitars, coolers. Someone even parked a taco truck near the woods. Matt swore he didn't hack the power grid to give us extra lighting, but I don't entirely believe him. Joe manned the grill like a general, spatula in one hand, tongs in the other. "We're doing ribs," he barked, "not bureaucracy." Lena showed up wearing a shirt that said, "Don't make me get the recording device," and carried a tray of cupcakes with little paper handcuffs on top. Even Reyes flew in, his tie loosened before he even stepped out of the Uber. "I bill by the hour," he said, taking a beer, "but I drink for free." Someone rigged a projector screen to play footage from the trial. Not the courtroom video, just Matt's unofficial highlight reel. Karen being cuffed, Hale face-planting during his escape attempt, the HOA office manager trying to claim diplomatic immunity in front of 3 deadpan FBI agents. The crowd roared. But it wasn't about revenge. Not really. It was about relief. About laughing in the face of a system that nearly stole something sacred. About reclaiming more than a deed, reclaiming the sense that what's yours can't be taken just because someone in a sweater set says so. At some point, someone raised a toast. "To Eric," they said, "and to every homeowner who stood their ground." I held up my glass, but I corrected them. "No," I said. "To Lena, who recorded a tyrant. To Joe, who tackled a criminal in cargo shorts. To Matt, who built a digital fortress. And to Reyes, who made the law work for people, not against them." There were cheers, not the polite kind, the kind that shakes fences. Later that night, after the crowd thinned and the fire pit burned low, I stood at the edge of my property, beer in hand, and looked out over the quiet woods. The moonlight danced on the old boundary line. The one Karen said was ambiguous. There was nothing ambiguous now. I owned every inch of this place, every tree, every creaking board on the porch, every defiant square foot. Lena walked up beside me. You think she ever thought it would end like this? I shook my head. No, I think she thought the system would protect her. I think she never expected anyone to push back. She nodded. Well, you pushed. I grinned. We all did. Behind us, the music picked up again. Someone strumming a guitar, someone singing off-key, someone dancing in the grass like they'd never been fined for it. And somewhere, far away in a very different kind of gated community, Karen Blake was probably wondering how everything had slipped through her fingers. Funny thing about power. It only works when people believe you have it. Out here, tonight, we believed in something else.
What happens when the very organization meant to protect community standards becomes the biggest threat to individual rights? This story shows us exactly that, how an HOA, led by a power-obsessed president, weaponized bureaucracy, intimidation, and fraudulent legal tactics to try and steal a man's home. At first glance, the HOA's actions seem absurd, citing imaginary fines, staging drone surveillance, accusing a retired cybersecurity consultant of aesthetic violations. But beneath the absurdity lies a deeper, more disturbing tactic, manufactured authority. When viewers ask, how could this happen? The answer lies not in the aggressor's boldness, but in the system's silence. A legal gray zone where documents speak louder than ethics. Should Eric have responded more aggressively early on? Could calling police the moment surveillance began have changed the escalation? Or was his slow build, gathering evidence, organizing allies, staying within legal bounds, exactly what exposed the rot at its core? What's striking is how the HOA relied on isolation as a strategy. They tried to paint Eric as a radical, whispering false rumors, cutting him off socially. But when neighbors like Lena, Joe, and Matt stepped in, that tactic crumbled. Would the story have ended differently if Eric had been alone, without a support system or the ability to document and fight back? The HOA's fatal flaw wasn't just their arrogance. It was their assumption that no one would push back hard enough or smart enough to hold them accountable. And when their web of lies triggered a fraud investigation, the real question became, how many other Karens are out there, quietly running their communities like private empires? This story is a warning and a blueprint. It proves that HOA abuse isn't just hypothetical, it's happening. But it also shows that with documentation, unity, and legal strategy, even the most entrenched power can be dismantled. In the end, power only works if people believe in it. And when you stop believing and start fighting, everything changes.